The emphasis on quality writing here at Southern Seminary springs from the idea that the greatest truths demand the clearest presentation. What you write matters, and how you write also matters. You're probably already convinced that spiritual leaders need to be effective writers, but did you know that improving your grammar and mechanics is essential to your becoming effective in your writing? You may have high-quality sources and write in a compelling style, but if your grammar and mechanics are weak, then your message gets muddied. Grammar and mechanics can be daunting subjects because each term refers to many things. To put it simply, grammar is how we combine words into sentences. Mechanics refers to the technical aspects of writing, like punctuation and capitalization. Together, grammar and mechanics include things like subject-verb agreement, correct use of tenses, parallel construction, run-on sentences, dangling modifiers, spelling, capitalization, and punctuation. It's easy to think these things aren't of eternal significance, but writers who don't take the time to self-edit and correct grammar and mechanic errors diminish their impact and lose their credibility with their readers. Since grammar and mechanics are such broad subjects, there are many aspects we could discuss today. But in order to best help you, we're going to only focus on 5 common mistakes that students frequently make. Mistake number 1 is improper subject-verb agreement. Verbs must agree with their subjects in number. Singular verbs require singular nouns, and plural subjects require plural verbs. For example, you would not write this sentence, Paul, who is one of the apostles, are writing to the church in Ephesus. Instead, you would write Paul, who is one of the apostles, is writing to the church in Ephesus. Even though the sentence includes a plural noun, apostles, immediately in front of the verb, the subject of the sentence, Paul, is singular, so the main verb must be singular also. Subject-verb agreement gets tricky when there are multiple subjects and only one verb. For example, in this sentence, it's incorrect to write Peter, James, and John follows Jesus up the Mount of Transfiguration. Even though Peter, James, and John are all singular nouns, the 3 of them together form a plural subject, and this is why we could replace their names with a plural noun, they. Therefore, we will need to change the verb to a plural one. Peter, James, and John followed Jesus up the Mount of Transfiguration. Secondly, a common error is inconsistent verb tense agreement. There are 3 basic verb tenses, past, present, and future. Each of those 3 tenses has 2 basic forms, simple and perfect. When you're writing, it's necessary for you to be consistent in the verb tense that you use. Let's begin by looking at an example of each verb tense in its simple form. A simple verb describes an action that occurs at a specific time. Present simple would be John graduates from seminary. Past simple, John graduated from seminary. Future simple, John will graduate from seminary. Now let's look at an example of each verb tense in its perfect form. A perfect verb is used to describe an action that varies in its duration. These variations include ongoing events, sequences of events, or events that continue to affect the current situation. So present perfect would be John has graduated from seminary. Past perfect, John had graduated from seminary. Future perfect, John will have graduated from seminary. In addition to simple and perfect, there are other verb forms that we won't consider here today. For now, the important thing to remember is that no matter the form, the tense of each verb should be consistent with other verbs in the sentence. Let's consider some examples of inconsistent verb tenses so we can correct them. The following sentence is incorrect because it has present and past tense verbs referring to the same subject. William Tyndale gave his life because he believes that every citizen should be able to read the Bible in their native language. To be consistent with the verb tense, we change gave and believes to match gave and believed. William Tyndale gave his life because he believed that every citizen should be able to read the Bible in their native language. In your writing, there'll be exceptions to the tense agreement rule. If a question arises, remember the following tips. 1, if possible, stay in the same verb tense. If you do change tenses within a sentence, make the order of events clear to the reader. A third common mistake is faulty parallel construction. Faulty parallel construction occurs when writers incorrectly combine 3 or more items together in a series. For example, Jonah was running from Nineveh, God, and swallowed by the whale. In order to determine what's wrong with this sentence, let's break it down into the form of an outline. Jonah was running from Nineveh. That makes sense. Let's see if the next one works. Jonah was running from God. That makes sense also. Let's try the third one. Jonah was running from swallowed by the whale. Swallowed by the whale? Clearly, it makes no sense to say Jonah was running from swallowed by the whale. Unless swallowed by the whale is the name of the whale. Even if we read the sentence differently, it still doesn't work. Jonah was, 1, running from Nineveh. Jonah was God. Jonah was swallowed by the whale. Because it makes no sense to say Jonah was God, we must revise the sentence altogether. Jonah was running from Nineveh and God, so he was swallowed by the whale. Let's look at another example. Emperor Diocletian's rule was marked by his forming the tetrarchy, advancing the legal system, and Christians were persecuted. This series does not use grammatically equal elements. The first 2 elements begin with present participle verbs. That is, verbs ending in ing. The last element of the sentence begins with a noun. The inconsistency is obvious when we put the sentence in outline form. Emperor Diocletian's rule was marked by his 1, forming the tetrarchy, 2, advancing the legal system, 3, Christians were persecuted. In order to be consistent in grammar, we can change the last element to a verb. To be consistent in style, we can make it a present participle verb, adding the ing ending. Emperor Diocletian's rule was marked by his forming the tetrarchy, advancing the legal system, and persecuting the Christians. If you still find yourself having trouble with parallel construction, remember that it's often a good idea to simply eliminate the series and rewrite the sentence in a standard form like this. Emperor Diocletian's rule was not only marked by his forming the tetrarchy and advancing the legal system, but also by his persecution of the Christians. If you do use a series, break down the components into outline form and make sure that they work individually before combining them. The 4th common mistake is the dangling modifier. Modifiers are phrases or clauses that add description in sentences. In well-written sentences, the modifiers are right next to, either in front of or behind, the target word they describe. But sometimes student writers will include a modifier but forget the target word it's supposed to describe. The modifier then dangles because the missing target word leaves nothing for the modifier to describe. Dangling modifiers are usually introductory word groups. For example, after raising Lazarus from the dead, the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus. The sentence suggests that it was the Pharisees who raised Lazarus from the dead. To correct the ambiguity of a dangling modifier, it's best to turn the modifier into a phrase that specifically names the one performing the action. After Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus. Let's look at another example. While traveling to Timnath to find a wife, the lion attacked Samson. Was the lion or Samson traveling to Timnath? We can make the sentence more clear by specifically naming the actor. While Samson was traveling to Timnath to find a wife, he was attacked by a lion. The 5th common mistake is improper punctuation when using a quote. Anytime that you include a quote in your writing, you should always place the punctuation inside the set of quotation marks. For example, the following form is incorrect. C.S. Lewis writes, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." To correct this mistake, we simply place the period inside the quotation mark. C.S. Lewis writes, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." The only exception to this rule is that if parenthetical citations are used, then you place the punctuation outside the quotation marks. For example, Jesus told his disciples, "No man comes to the Father except through me," John 14:6. You'll also use parenthetical citations in book reviews. Andrew Murray says, "We find the Christian life so difficult because we seek for God's blessing while we live the life according to our own desires." Page 89. Whether the parenthetical information is a scripture verse or a page number, the period goes after the ending parentheses. I hope reviewing these 5 rules will encourage you to strengthen your grammar and mechanics and to thoroughly proofread your own writing. If you struggle with proofreading your own work, try these techniques. 1. Don't worry about grammar and mechanics until you've written a draft that you are satisfied with. While you're in the throes of writing, concentrate on the content. After you've chiseled out your meaning, go back and tinker with the grammar and mechanics. Second, start writing early and let your writing cool down between drafts. If you start writing your papers early, you'll have a chance to walk away from your paper, live some life, and then return. Writers who give themselves a day or so between drafts suddenly see their writing from a reader's perspective. We all tend to love what we've written until we read and gain some distance from our own work and see it like others do. Third, read your paper backwards. Start with the last sentence and read it. And when you've edited that sentence, read the second to the last sentence and check that for grammar and mechanics. The act of reading your paper backwards, sentence by sentence, forces you to sit down and see each sentence individually, instead of getting caught up in the flow of your writing. This helps you separate meaning and organization from surface error issues. Fourth, to be more thorough, make sure to check for one type of error at a time, paragraph by paragraph. For example, read your paper through to check for comma errors. Only comma errors. Then after correcting those errors, go back through your paper looking for verb tense problems, etc. Fifth, brush up on your mechanics and grammar with resources like Purdue's OWL online or Strunk and White's Elements of Style. 6. Get help from a coach at the Writing Center on campus in either of the two locations. All leaders are writers. Today's pastors, missionaries, and ministry leaders write prolifically. Blogs, emails, sermons, notes, articles, and books. As a Christian leader, you have an extremely important message to communicate. And if you're to communicate it clearly and compellingly, you must sharpen your grammar and mechanics. Even if you're a good writer, use your time at seminary to hone your writing skills so that you can be an effective writer for the kingdom's sake.